I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
The confrontation was never supposed to happen in public. Yet before senior aides, private secretaries, and stunned household staff, Prince Harry turned toward Queen Camilla and delivered an accusation that shattered the room's carefully maintained silence. He claimed she had deliberately allowed private information about him and Meghan to reach the press to strengthen her own position. Then King Charles rose from his chair and lost control. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew everyone inside the briefing room understood the danger. The king had gathered Camilla, Harry, William, and officials to settle a confidential dispute, warning that nothing spoken behind the closed door could leave it. A private secretary, a senior official who manages correspondence and sensitive decisions, sat frozen beside an unopened folder. One leak could weaken the monarch's authority and turn family pain into national crisis. Harry had returned expecting a conversation with his father, not an audience arranged around him. The Duke saw Camilla beside the monarch, William watching, and officials positioned like witnesses. He felt cornered before anyone spoke. Then he said it plainly. The Queen Consort had allowed private details about him and Meghan to reach journalists so favorable stories about her could replace criticism. She did not interrupt. Her silence sharpened his anger. Charles struck the table. A glass trembled beside the folder as he ordered his son to withdraw the charge. The father sounded wounded. The sovereign sounded furious. Harry refused. He held the king's stare and repeated that conversations had appeared in print, with language too exact to be coincidence. Camilla remained still, but looked away when Meghan's name returned. The private secretary noticed the sealed envelope in Harry's hand. The prince opened it, revealing dates, names, publication times, and internal messages obtained through a documented account from a former palace communications employee. His claim was no longer resentment. He had arrived prepared to prove that someone inside the royal circle had turned family pain into public strategy. Camilla's composure cracked when Harry mentioned a private conversation inside Clarence House, the London residence used by Charles and his wife. Only a few people knew what had been said. William watched his father's rage shift into fear. The future king understood this was no longer a battle between relatives. It was a struggle over loyalty, reputation, and control at the monarchy's core. But the accusation could not be understood through Harry's fury alone, because every person in that room had arrived carrying an older wound, and Camilla's silence was about to make those wounds impossible to ignore. Behind the titles stood four people trapped by memories they could neither erase nor admit. Harry saw betrayal where Charles demanded loyalty. Camilla saw an old judgment returning in a new form. William saw another family crisis threatening the crown. And Charles, caught between his wife and his youngest son, faced the choice he had postponed for years. In that room, royal authority could no longer protect anyone from personal pain. Harry remained close to the table, still holding the sealed envelope, as though releasing it would surrender the only protection he had left. He believed private grief had become a weapon too many times, first through carefully planted stories, then through silences that allowed those stories to harden into truth. The Duke, a royal title traditionally given to a senior male member of the family, had learned that palace survival often depended on protecting the most powerful person in the room. In his mind, he and Meghan had repeatedly been offered up because they were easier to isolate than defend. That belief made retreat impossible now. Camilla understood the danger from another direction. She had spent years moving from public rejection toward acceptance beside Charles, and one accusation involving press manipulation could reopen every suspicion she thought had finally been buried. The Queen Consort did not simply fear embarrassment. She feared that the legitimacy she had fought to secure could collapse under the suggestion Sympathy for her had been purchased through someone else's suffering. Her face remained controlled, but the stillness around her was no longer calm. It was calculation mixed with dread. Charles moved toward the window when the meeting paused. He breathed heavily while an aide waited several steps behind him, uncertain whether to speak or disappear. The king felt Harry had attacked more than his wife. His son had challenged his judgment as a father, his authority as monarch, and the choice to place Camilla at the center of his reign. He had defended that decision for years. Now the same decision stood between him and his youngest child like a locked door. William approached Harry quietly and asked whether he understood what he had unleashed. The prince kept his voice low, but the warning carried weight. The future king knew one accusation could split the household, damage his father's reign, and revive wounds the institution had spent years suppressing. Harry did not soften. He told his brother that silence had already cost him his family, and he would rather destroy the room's false peace than keep pretending it had ever protected him. Camilla drew her equerry aside moments later and asked exactly which members of staff had heard the accusation. An equerry is a royal officer who assists a senior member of the family with official and personal duties. Her first concern was how far Harry's words might travel. The question revealed the scale of her fear, but it also deepened the suspicion surrounding her. A palace aide then recognized one of the names written on Harry's envelope. He had seen it during an earlier communications meeting, linked to discussions involving press coverage and household strategy. The memory changed his expression instantly. Someone still serving inside the palace might be connected to the evidence. Charles returned and ordered every attendee to remain available for questioning. Harry leaned toward William and said the accusation had begun with one precise incident, an incident the family had deliberately dismissed. That incident had occurred months earlier, during a ceremony built to display royal unity. But behind its polished order, one private conversation had set the entire confrontation in motion. The breaking point did not begin with shouting. It began beneath the discipline of a royal ceremony, when every smile was measured and every movement rehearsed. Harry had entered believing that one private exchange might reopen a path to his father. By the following morning, details from that exchange had appeared in the press. The wording was so precise that he knew someone close to the king had turned vulnerability into strategy. Harry had waited until the Windsor Remembrance ceremony was over before approaching Charles. The event, a formal gathering held to honor deceased members of the royal family, had demanded unity from everyone present, even while old tension remained beneath every polite exchange. The Duke asked for something simple but deeply personal: written security assurances for Meghan and their children during future visits. He told his father that he could not bring them back while their safety depended on changing private arrangements. Charles listened without interruption. Camilla stood nearby, while one senior aide remained close enough to hear every word. The king promised the conversation would remain confidential. For Harry, that promise mattered because it offered more than protection. It suggested that his father might finally separate family trust from palace strategy. The queen consort said little, but she heard him admit the fear he had carried for months. The next morning destroyed that fragile hope. Harry sat alone with a newspaper column describing him as demanding special treatment and using concerns about his children to pressure the monarch. He lowered the page slowly. Several phrases matched language spoken inside the private room, including words he had used to explain why Meghan felt unable to return. Someone had not merely repeated the subject. Someone had repeated his vulnerability. Harry called Charles immediately. He asked who had shared the conversation and whether Camilla's office had been involved. His father rejected the implication with visible anger in his voice. The monarch warned him not to accuse members of the household without proof, then ended the call before his son could explain why the wording mattered. That sudden ending changed suspicion into resolve. Harry began building a timeline. He compared publication hours, staff schedules, earlier private meetings, and stories that had appeared soon afterward. A pattern emerged. Damaging coverage of him often arrived beside warmer reporting about Camilla. The connection did not prove she had spoken, but it suggested someone believed his suffering could help protect her standing. A former palace communications employee then sent him a documented message containing a date, a courtier's initials, and 6 chilling words. Ask who approved the briefing. That message became the foundation of the sealed envelope. The final page identified a communications meeting held at Clarence House, the London residence used by Charles and Camilla, less than 24 hours before the article appeared. She had attended it. When Harry placed that page on the palace table, the conflict stopped being a painful argument about memory and became a direct confrontation over who had spoken, who had approved it, and who had been protected. The room had already heard the accusation, but Harry was not finished. He removed one document from the envelope, pushed it across the table, and asked Camilla to look at him. Charles ordered him to sit down. William warned him to stop. Harry ignored them both. His voice became quieter, not louder, as he demanded that his stepmother deny authorizing a briefing built from words spoken in confidence. Charles returned after the short recess, determined to restore control. The king entered first, his expression fixed, while Camilla followed separately and chose the chair beside him instead of the one facing Harry. That decision carried its own message. She wanted the room to see that she stood with her husband, yet she also avoided placing herself directly in the path of her stepson's anger. William remained near the table, watching both men as the fragile silence tightened again. Harry opened the file and traced the timeline with one finger. The Windsor conversation had occurred first. The Clarence House meeting followed hours later. Then the newspaper column appeared the next morning. A communications briefing is a private discussion in which royal staff decide how to answer or shape press coverage. The document did not show Camilla speaking to any journalist. It showed that her office had discussed how the damaging story should be handled before publication. Harry pushed the page closer. "Look at me and deny that my private words were used." Camilla lifted her eyes and held his stare. The Queen Consort said she had never instructed anyone to betray him, and for one brief second, pain replaced calculation in her voice. But the Duke did not retreat. He answered that allowing a betrayal was not the same as ordering one, and silence could protect wrongdoing as effectively as a command. Charles rose so suddenly that his chair struck the floor behind him. The monarch shouted that his son would not interrogate the Queen in front of palace employees. Harry stood his ground, while William stepped forward and warned them both that anger was burying the truth. The prince knew his father's outburst might protect Camilla in that moment, but it also made the king appear frightened of the evidence. Camilla finally admitted that she had been told the press intended to publish a hostile account of the Windsor conversation. She said her team discussed a response because the story could damage the entire household, but she denied supplying the original details. Her admission changed the room. She had known, she had prepared, and she had never warned Harry. Charles turned to the communications secretary and asked whether another royal household had provided the wording. The official hesitated. Only seconds passed, but everyone noticed. When the king demanded an answer, the secretary requested a private conversation. Harry understood then that the secret might be larger than Camilla. Charles's own staff may have allowed the attack to continue because it served the institution. The confrontation had exposed anger, but the secretary's hesitation exposed power. And behind the family's accusations stood a palace system capable of deciding whose reputation would be saved and whose could be spent. Royal power rarely announces itself with a command. It moves through calendars, briefing notes, private lunches, and carefully chosen silences. As Charles tried to regain control, the question shifted from who had spoken to the press to who had possessed the authority to let the story spread. Because the monarchy's communications machine had not acted outside the family, it had acted around them, between them, and sometimes against them. Charles withdrew to his study with the communications secretary's private statement and locked the door. Separate royal households had grown around senior family members, each with its own advisors protecting one principal's reputation and duties. Those competing teams could respond to damaging coverage without revealing every tactic to one another. Even when the consequences reached the king, Camilla, Harry, and William, what appeared to the public as one united palace was, behind closed doors, a collection of rival interests held together by discipline. The king possessed the final authority, but he now understood how rarely power moved through him directly. Experienced private secretaries and press officials decided which claims required a denial, which scandals needed a distraction, and which attacks should be met with silence. A communications strategy meant the organized method used by palace staff to manage public stories and protect royal reputations. Charles had trusted that machine because it preserved stability. Now he feared it had preserved the crown by feeding on his son. Charles read until one sentence forced him to stop. The statement confirmed that officials had discussed presenting Harry's security request as proof that he remained unreasonable and unstable. He removed his glasses and placed them beside the document. The father inside him recognized the cruelty immediately. His youngest child's fear for Meghan and their children had been converted into an argument against him. Camilla entered without waiting for an invitation. She saw the paper, then asked whether her husband believed she had approved the tactic. The Queen consort expected an immediate denial. None came. Charles looked down before answering, and that pause cut deeper than any accusation Harry had made. She had spent years believing the monarch's trust was the one defense no scandal could take from her. Now doubt had entered their marriage. The statement contained no recorded instruction from Camilla. Yet one official in her household had argued that the hostile coverage could rebalance public sympathy after criticism of her. She said she had never authorized those words. But Charles could no longer ignore that someone serving her had viewed Harry's pain as useful. Charles then reached the most damaging admission. His chief officials knew the column relied on a confidential family conversation, but chose not to challenge it. Protecting the institution had quietly become more important than protecting his son. The king suspended the communications secretary from sensitive duties. Staff immediately began fearing they would be sacrificed to protect those above them. By attempting to contain the scandal, Charles had changed the palace itself, and before the day ended, the first consequences would fall on Camilla, Harry, and the frightened staff caught between them. The palace did not collapse after the confrontation. It tightened. Doors closed. Phones were collected. Meetings vanished from schedules. Staff who had spent years mastering discretion suddenly avoided one another in the corridors. Yet the most painful consequence unfolded away from the officials. Camilla returned to her rooms under suspicion. Harry remained isolated inside the palace, and Charles discovered that commanding silence could not restore the loyalty his anger had damaged. Charles ordered an internal review before anyone could leave. Would focus on the Windsor conversation and the communications meeting at Clarence House. Every person present at that earlier discussion had to surrender briefing records, private messages, and handwritten notes. The king wanted control, but the order spread fear. Staff understood that one missing detail could end a career, while one convenient explanation might protect someone far more powerful. Harry was asked to remain inside the palace until a second discussion could be arranged. Officials insisted the request would prevent further escalation and protect the confidentiality of the review. The Duke heard something different. To him, it sounded like another effort to contain his anger, control his movements, and decide when he was permitted to speak. He had arrived demanding truth. Yet once again the institution was treating him like the danger rather than the person who had exposed it. Camilla entered her private sitting room and removed the brooch she had worn during the confrontation. Her fingers shook as she placed it on the table. Once the door closed, the Queen consort called her sister and admitted that Charles had looked at her as though he no longer knew what to believe. She insisted she had never ordered a leak, but her voice weakened when she acknowledged that her household had discussed benefiting from the coverage. Suspicion had reached the one relationship she believed could survive anything. Harry called Meghan from the room assigned to him. He described his father striking the table, then admitted through their private conversation that the outburst had affected him more deeply than expected. His anger gave way to grief. Part of him had still hoped Charles would ask why he felt betrayed. Instead, the king had demanded withdrawal before offering understanding. Meghan listened as her husband confessed that the confrontation had reopened every wound he had tried to harden against. William received a confidential summary showing that 2 royal households had exchanged talking points before the article appeared. The prince realized the coordination was broader than Harry knew, yet the original source of the private wording remained hidden. A junior aide then requested protection before giving a documented statement, claiming a superior had ordered staff never to record where the details came from. Someone had expected scrutiny. William abandoned the idea of another formal meeting. He went to Harry's room, dismissed the waiting aides, and closed the door. With the officials removed and the palace machinery held outside, the 2 brothers were finally left with no documents to hide behind, and one of them was about to say what the family had avoided for years. For the first time that day, there were no secretaries, no advisors, and no carefully prepared statements. William stood inside Harry's room while his younger brother remained beside the fireplace, still holding the envelope that had detonated the palace meeting. Neither man spoke at first. The silence between them carried years of grief. Then William asked one question that changed the direction of the crisis. What outcome would actually be enough? Harry looked down at the documents but did not answer immediately. William told him the internal investigation might uncover procedural wrongdoing, meaning failures in the rules and methods palace staff were expected to follow, but it could not repair every wound he connected to the institution. The prince asked his brother to separate what the evidence proved from the resentment built through years of humiliation, distance, and mistrust. Otherwise, even the truth would become another weapon. Harry answered that he had not returned to destroy Camilla or publicly humiliate her. The Duke wanted acknowledgement that private pain had repeatedly been treated as material to manage, trade, or quietly ignore. His fears about Meghan and their children had become useful to people protecting royal reputations. That mattered because every leaked confidence made reconciliation less possible, while every denial made him feel the family valued stability more than honesty. William admitted palace communication decisions had trapped him too. The future king had watched personal moments become public narratives, yet he had chosen endurance because departure would have threatened his duty, marriage, and children. Harry rejected the comparison. He said endurance had protected his older brother because the monarchy needed him. The institution could not easily sacrifice its heir, but it could isolate the son who had walked away. William's restraint finally broke. He accused Harry of turning every disagreement into proof of conspiracy. His younger brother answered by invoking their mother, insisting they had learned different lessons from her suffering. The brothers argued over their wives, their choices, and the separate ways grief had shaped them. Then, the prince's voice softened. He said Charles's outburst had not been strength. It had been a frightened father, realizing he had lost control of his family. Harry fell silent, because the judgment was painful and true. Harry then disclosed what the former communications employee had written in a documented message. The source had never claimed Camilla personally leaked the conversation. The warning suggested her household recognized the advantage, accepted it, and chose not to stop the hostile narrative. The distinction weakened his loudest accusation, but strengthened his deeper charge. William proposed a direct settlement. Charles must acknowledge that confidential words were misused. Camilla must answer for her office's response. Harry must withdraw any claim the evidence could not support. His brother agreed, but only if the final conversation included the king and queen consort, without officials, prepared statements, or institutional protection. The public still knew nothing of the fragile agreement taking shape, but the palace could not contain the shock forever, and by morning the confrontation had escaped beyond its gates. By sunrise, the private confrontation had become a national spectacle. A newspaper front page showed photographs of Charles, Harry, and Camilla beneath 3 words printed across the width of the page: "Palace family erupts." Broadcasters gathered outside royal residences. Commentators argued over loyalty and betrayal, and crowds began forming behind the barriers at Buckingham Palace. What had begun inside one sealed room now belonged to millions of strangers. The palace released a brief statement confirming that a private family discussion had taken place, but it refused to address Harry's accusation or Charles's outburst. A palace statement is an official message issued on behalf of the royal household to shape public understanding without revealing every private detail. The carefully chosen words were meant to contain the crisis. Instead, they deepened it. The statement denied nothing, and that silence allowed every possibility to grow. Television coverage split the country into competing camps. Some commentators framed the conflict as a father defending his wife against a son, consumed by old resentment. Others described it as a man demanding accountability after years of seeing private pain turned into public strategy. Harry became a symbol of rebellion to some and wounded honesty to others. Camilla became either the unfair target of a family grievance or the protected center of a system finally being questioned. Charles watched the morning broadcast without sound. The king remained still until footage showed crowds gathering outside Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official London residence and the public center of royal life. Then he turned away. His private failure had become evidence of instability in his reign, and the authority he had tried to defend with anger now appeared weaker because of it. Camilla read the front page alone. The queen consort circled a sentence claiming her silence during the confrontation amounted to an admission. She tore the page once, stopped, and placed it beside Harry's timeline. Her reputation had taken years to rebuild, yet one morning had reopened every doubt. Still, the documents beside her forced another truth into the room. Her office had known enough to act and had chosen not to warn him. A broadcaster then announced that a senior communications official had been suspended pending internal review. That detail changed the public mood. The crisis was no longer merely a bitter argument between relatives. It suggested that palace machinery had played a real part in Harry's grievance. Outside Buckingham Palace, one woman raised a handwritten sign above the barriers. "Families need truth, even royal ones." Cameras returned to it again and again, until the message became the defining image of the day. Charles rejected another prepared statement. He summoned Harry, Camilla, and William for a final private reckoning, where responsibility would be named plainly. The monarchy had spent centuries controlling the language of crisis, but Charles now understood that only an honest family verdict, not another palace, formula. But he spoke first as a father. Harry arrived prepared for another denial. Camilla expected another accusation. William sat between them, not as an heir managing a crisis, but as a son refusing to watch his family fracture again. What followed did not erase the past, yet it forced each of them to accept a truth the palace could no longer conceal. Charles began with the internal review. The king confirmed that Harry's private Windsor conversation had been discussed by palace communications staff, and later used to shape a response when hostile press coverage emerged. An internal review is a formal examination of decisions, messages, and conduct inside an organization. The findings mattered, because they proved the Duke's fear had not been imagined. Words spoken as a son to his father had entered a system that viewed pain as material to manage. The report did not prove Camilla had personally delivered the information to journalists. It established that someone within the wider royal communications structure had failed to protect confidential family words. The Queen consort listened without interruption, while William watched Harry absorb the distinction. His central wound was real, but the loudest part of his accusation had reached beyond the evidence. Charles turned toward his youngest son and said the charge against Camilla had gone too far. Then his voice softened. The monarch admitted that his own rage had prevented him from hearing the betrayal beneath Harry's anger. He had defended his authority before protecting his child, and that failure could not be blamed on secretaries. The Duke did not celebrate the admission. He simply lowered his eyes, as if the words had arrived years too late. Camilla then acknowledged that her office understood the coverage might improve her public position and failed to challenge it. She told Harry that benefiting from his pain without intervening had been wrong, even though she had not initiated the leak. The Queen consort offered no excuse. Her admission did not erase suspicion, but it finally placed responsibility where silence had once stood. Harry withdrew the claim that Camilla had personally ordered the disclosure. Yet he refused to withdraw the deeper charge. The palace had repeatedly treated family trust as expendable. Charles accepted that verdict without interruption. The king permanently removed the communications secretary from sensitive family briefings. He introduced written confidentiality rules across every royal household and ordered that private family discussions could never again enter media, strategy without direct consent. Harry and Camilla did not embrace. William did not pretend closeness had returned. Charles did not claim victory. They left with something rarer than reconciliation, responsibility clearly named. The monarchy survived because appearances were no longer allowed to replace truth. The confrontation ended not with victory, forgiveness, or royal perfection, but with a permanent lesson. A crown may survive scandal, yet no family can survive forever when loyalty is demanded without honesty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.